Christians, Israel, and the struggle for justice. Introduction. In the modern landscape of geopolitics, few issues generate as much controversy and emotion as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This struggle spans decades, involving complex histories, diverse narratives, and deep-rooted pain. Among those attempting to navigate this challenging terrain are Christians who, informed by their faith, find themselves called to speak out for justice and peace. Yet, a profound silence exists among many Christians when it comes to the plight of Palestinians. For a community that holds justice, mercy, and love for one's neighbor as central tenets, this silence is particularly striking. Some might call the situation between Israel and Palestine a genocide, a term that carries heavy significance. Defined by the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, it denotes acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The use of this term in relation to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is fraught with controversy, particularly among Christians who feel torn between biblical narratives and modern politics. The core of this book is to explore the theological and moral responsibility of Christians in the face of such injustice. Christians are called to be peacemakers, Matthew 5:9, to act justly, Micah 6:8, and to love their neighbors, Mark 12:31. However, many remain silent due to fear of backlash, whether accusations of anti-Semitism, alienation from their religious communities, or even political repercussions. These fears have led to a critical question: what is the Christian response to the suffering of Palestinians? Through scripture, historical exploration, and case studies, this book will examine the role of Christians in advocating for justice. It is not about diminishing the complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or vilifying one side over the other. Instead, it seeks to encourage believers to reflect on their faith, to embrace the call to justice, and to engage in compassionate, informed dialogue. Chapter 1: Historical Context. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the longest and most intractable disputes in modern history. Its roots run deep, intersecting with religion, politics, and global power dynamics. To understand the present situation, we must look at the historical forces that shaped it. Early history, biblical foundations. The land we now know as Israel and Palestine has been a focal point of history, religion, and conflict for millennia. In the Bible, the land is promised to the descendants of Abraham, creating an ancient connection between the Jewish people and this land. However, the same land also holds spiritual significance for Christians and Muslims. Over centuries, the region has seen countless empires rise and fall, each leaving its mark on the land and its people. In Genesis 12:1-3, God calls Abraham, promising him land and descendants. This foundational text has been a key point in Jewish claims to the land, with many Christians interpreting these promises through a theological lens that includes the establishment of Israel in 1948. Yet, for Palestinians, this same land is their ancestral home, making the conflict not only a matter of politics but also one of identity and survival. Ottoman rule and British mandate. For nearly 400 years, the region was part of the Ottoman Empire. During this period, Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived in relative coexistence, though tensions simmered beneath the surface. The fall of the Ottoman Empire after World War I opened the door for new political realities. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration signaled British support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, creating tension between Jewish and Arab populations. This declaration, paired with increasing Jewish immigration due to rising anti-Semitism in Europe, laid the groundwork for the eventual creation of the State of Israel in 1948. Palestinians, who had lived in the region for generations, found themselves marginalized and displaced. The creation of Israel and the Nakba. The year 1948 is pivotal in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Following the horrors of the Holocaust and the collapse of British colonial power in the region, the State of Israel was established. For Jews, it marked the realization of a long-held dream, a return to their ancestral homeland. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe, a time of massive displacement, loss, and violence. Approximately 700,000 Palestinians were forced to flee their homes during the 1948 war. Many of these refugees and their descendants still live in refugee camps today, stateless and struggling for recognition. This event set the stage for decades of tension, war, and negotiation, none of which have led to a lasting solution. Key events in the conflict. The Six-Day War, 1967. Israel's stunning military victory during this war led to the occupation of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. These territories remain a central issue in peace negotiations, with Palestinians seeking recognition of their right to self-determination in these areas. The Oslo Accords, 1993 to 1995. A glimmer of hope appeared in the early 1990s with the signing of the Oslo Accords, which established the Palestinian Authority and laid the groundwork for future negotiations. However, this peace process ultimately faltered, with key issues such as the status of Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and the continued expansion of Israeli settlements remaining unresolved. Second Intifada, 2000 to 2005. Frustration over the lack of progress led to a second wave of Palestinian uprisings, known as the Second Intifada. Violence escalated on both sides, leading to significant casualties and deepening the divide between Israelis and Palestinians. Recent developments. In recent decades, peace talks have stalled, and tensions have only increased. Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank continues, viewed by many in the international community as illegal under international law. The Gaza Strip remains blockaded, with intermittent conflicts further exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. Many human rights organizations have raised alarms about the treatment of Palestinians, comparing the situation to apartheid. The role of Christianity. Christianity has played a complex role in the region's history. While the land is central to Christian tradition, particularly Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth, the relationship between Christians and the modern State of Israel is multifaceted. Christian Zionism, a movement within some evangelical circles, sees the establishment of Israel as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. This belief often leads to unconditional support for Israel, overshadowing the concerns of Palestinians, including Palestinian Christians. Meanwhile, Palestinian Christians themselves have long been part of the resistance against occupation, advocating for peace and justice from within a framework of faith. Chapter 2, Biblical Foundations. The Bible serves as a central text for understanding justice, peace, and mercy within the Christian tradition. Christians look to Scripture for guidance in matters of morality and ethics, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is no exception. However, the Bible has been interpreted in various ways to support different narratives surrounding this issue, particularly regarding the land of Israel. Understanding these interpretations and the broader biblical teachings on justice and mercy is critical for forming a thoughtful Christian perspective on the conflict. Old Testament foundations, promises and prophecies. The Old Testament contains numerous references to the land of Israel, particularly in the context of God's covenant with the Israelites. In Genesis 12:1-3, God makes a promise to Abraham, stating, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." This passage, along with others like Genesis 15:18 and Exodus 23:31, is often cited to support the claim that the land belongs to the Jewish people by divine right. The concept of the Promised Land is deeply rooted in Jewish theology and has been a key element in Zionist thought. For many Christians, this biblical promise extends to their understanding of modern Israel, leading to the widespread support of the state among certain Christian denominations, particularly evangelical communities. However, it is essential to acknowledge that the biblical narrative is also filled with calls for justice, compassion, and care for the foreigner and the oppressed. For example, in Leviticus 19:33-34, God commands the Israelites to treat foreigners with kindness. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. This dual emphasis on the land and on justice creates a theological tension that Christians must navigate when considering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. While the land holds spiritual significance, the Bible also emphasizes the importance of justice, mercy, and the well-being of all people, including those who may not share the same religious or ethnic background. The prophets and justice. The Hebrew prophets frequently spoke out against injustice, emphasizing the importance of caring for the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. The words of the prophet Micah are particularly relevant. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Micah 6:8. This verse encapsulates the biblical mandate for justice, calling believers to act with integrity and compassion in their dealings with others. Similarly, the prophet Isaiah condemns those who perpetuate injustice, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Isaiah 1:17. Isaiah's vision for a just society extends beyond personal morality to include societal structures and the treatment of marginalized groups. His message is one of radical inclusion and care for the vulnerable, values that should inform Christian responses to the conflict in Israel and Palestine. The prophetic tradition does not only call for justice but also warns against the misuse of power. For instance, Amos critiques the wealthy and powerful who oppress the poor. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Amos 5:24. This imagery of justice as a mighty, unstoppable force highlights the urgency with which God views the pursuit of equity. Amos reminds believers that true worship of God requires more than ritual or piety. It demands a commitment to justice in everyday life. New Testament teachings, the ministry of Jesus. In the New Testament, Jesus' ministry further emphasizes the call to justice, particularly in how believers are to treat the marginalized and oppressed. One of the most powerful examples of this is found in Matthew 25:31-46, where Jesus speaks of the final judgment. He praises those who feed the hungry, welcome the stranger, clothe the naked, and visit the imprisoned, declaring, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." This passage underscores the Christian obligation to care for those in need, aligning closely with the plight of the Palestinians, many of whom have experienced displacement, poverty, and injustice. Jesus' teaching challenges Christians to extend compassion and mercy to all people, regardless of their ethnicity or political identity. Moreover, Jesus explicitly identifies with the oppressed. In Luke 4:18-19, he reads from the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, proclaiming, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Jesus' mission, as outlined here, is not only spiritual but deeply rooted in social justice. Peacemaking as a Christian vocation. Throughout his teachings, Jesus calls for peace and reconciliation, urging his followers to be peacemakers. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus famously declares, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God," Matthew 5:9. This call to peacemaking is not passive, it is an active pursuit of reconciliation, justice, and harmony. In the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, this teaching becomes especially relevant. Christians are called to be agents of peace, advocating for solutions that promote justice and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians. This means not aligning with one side to the exclusion of the other but seeking a path that upholds the human rights and dignity of all involved. Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10:25-37, further illustrates the principle of neighborly love across ethnic and religious boundaries. In the parable, a man is beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. Religious figures pass by without offering help, but a Samaritan, a member of a group despised by Jews at the time, stops to care for the man. Jesus uses this story to challenge his listeners to extend love and mercy beyond their own community, emphasizing that one's neighbor includes even those who are considered outsiders or enemies. The Church's role in justice and reconciliation. The early Christian Church understood itself as a community committed to justice, equality, and the common good. In Acts 2:44-45, the believers are described as sharing their possessions and ensuring that no one among them was in need. This communal approach to justice reflects the heart of Christian ethics, which is grounded in love, generosity, and mutual care. James 2:14-17 also emphasizes that faith without action is dead, urging Christians to live out their beliefs through concrete acts of justice and mercy. This call to action remains relevant today, particularly in addressing the injustices faced by Palestinians living under occupation. The Church has historically served as a prophetic voice, challenging systems of oppression and injustice. Today, Christians are called to continue this tradition, advocating for peace, justice, and reconciliation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This means listening to the voices of the oppressed, standing in solidarity with the marginalized, and working toward a solution that reflects the biblical mandate for justice. Chapter 3: The Theology of Justice. Justice lies at the heart of the Christian faith, deeply embedded in the character of God and woven throughout the teachings of Scripture. In the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the theology of justice is particularly relevant, as Christians are called to address oppression, stand with the marginalized, and act as advocates for peace and equity. This chapter delves into the Christian understanding of justice and its application in modern struggles, such as the conflict in Israel and Palestine. God as the source of justice. The Bible portrays God as a just and righteous ruler, one who cares deeply about the well-being of all creation, particularly the vulnerable and oppressed. Throughout Scripture, God is repeatedly referred to as a judge who upholds justice and righteousness. In Psalm 89:14, it states, "Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne, steadfast love and faithfulness go before you." This image of God establishes a divine standard for justice, one that reflects God's desire for equity and fairness in human relationships. Justice in the biblical sense is not merely about punitive measures but about restoring right relationships and ensuring that everyone, especially the powerless, is treated with dignity and respect. In Deuteronomy 10:17-18, God is described as one who executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. This passage highlights God's concern for those on the margins of society, emphasizing the need for human systems to reflect the same care. The biblical mandate for justice. The call to justice is central to Christian ethics. The Old Testament prophets, as well as the teachings of Jesus, provide a clear mandate for believers to act justly and to challenge systems of oppression. In Micah 6:8, the prophet poses the question, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?" This verse succinctly encapsulates the Christian responsibility to integrate justice, compassion, and humility into everyday life. Throughout the Old Testament, God commands His people to ensure justice for the poor, the foreigner, and the oppressed. In Jeremiah 22:3, the prophet relays God's instruction, "Do what is just and right. Rescue from the hand of the oppressor the one who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow." These directives form a moral framework for how Christians are to engage with contemporary social and political issues, including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Moreover, the book of Isaiah presents a vision of justice that goes beyond personal piety, urging systemic change to address inequalities. In Isaiah 58:6-7, God calls for a radical form of justice. "Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter?" This passage underscores that true devotion to God requires active engagement in the work of justice. Jesus and Justice, a revolutionary message. Jesus' ministry was marked by a radical commitment to justice and mercy. His teachings often challenged the religious and social hierarchies of his time, calling for an inversion of power structures that oppress the poor and marginalized. In Luke 4:18-19, Jesus declares his mission, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." This passage, which opens Jesus' public ministry, sets the tone for his work, a ministry that would be marked by a focus on justice, liberation, and compassion for those on the fringes of society. Jesus did not merely preach a personal salvation but a social one, where the structures of oppression and inequality were dismantled, and all people were invited into the fullness of life. Throughout his ministry, Jesus emphasized the importance of caring for the least of these, Matthew 25:40, identifying himself with the poor, the stranger, and the oppressed. In the parable of the sheep and the goats, Matthew 25:31-46, Jesus warns that his followers will be judged based on their treatment of the vulnerable, feeding the hungry, welcoming the stranger, clothing the naked, and visiting those in prison. This teaching reinforces the idea that justice is a central aspect of Christian discipleship. Religious hypocrisy and the call for integrity. One of Jesus' strongest criticisms was directed toward religious leaders who neglected justice while upholding external religious practices. In Matthew 23:23, Jesus rebukes the Pharisees, saying, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. But you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness." This condemnation highlights the danger of focusing on ritual purity while ignoring the ethical imperatives of justice and mercy. For Christians today, this passage serves as a caution against becoming complacent or comfortable within systems that perpetuate injustice. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, like many global issues, can be difficult to address because it challenges deeply held beliefs and political alliances. Yet, the teachings of Jesus demand that Christians confront these complexities with integrity, prioritizing justice over convenience or comfort. The role of the Church, a community of justice. The early Christian community understood itself as a radical alternative to the oppressive systems of the Roman Empire. In Acts 2:44-45, the early believers are described as sharing everything they had, ensuring that there were no needy persons among them. This communal ethic reflects the biblical vision of justice, where economic and social structures are shaped by love, generosity, and mutual care. The Epistle of James further emphasizes that faith without action is meaningless. In James 2:17, it states, "Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." This call to action resonates with the theology of justice, urging believers to move beyond mere belief into the realm of transformative action. The Church, as a collective body of believers, is called to be a prophetic voice in the world, advocating for justice, peace, and reconciliation. Justice in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the theology of justice compels Christians to confront the realities of occupation, displacement, and inequality. Palestinians, including Palestinian Christians, have faced decades of dispossession and oppression, and many Christian leaders and theologians have called for the global church to take a stand. While some Christians have aligned themselves with Christian Zionism, supporting the modern state of Israel as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, others have taken a different approach, focusing on the plight of Palestinians and the need for justice in the land. These divergent perspectives raise important questions about how the Bible should be interpreted in light of contemporary political realities. At the heart of the Christian commitment to justice is the recognition that all people are made in the image of God, Genesis 1:27, and are therefore deserving of dignity, respect, and freedom. This theological principle challenges any system that dehumanizes or oppresses individuals or groups, whether in Israel, Palestine, or elsewhere. Reclaiming the prophetic voice. The Church is called to be a prophetic voice in the world, speaking truth to power and advocating for those who cannot speak for themselves. The prophetic tradition in the Old Testament, embodied by figures like Isaiah, Amos, and Micah, serves as a model for Christians today. These prophets confronted the leaders of their time, demanding that they uphold justice and righteousness, often at great personal cost. In the face of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the prophetic voice must call for an end to violence, occupation, and inequality. This voice must advocate for a just peace that honors the dignity of both Israelis and Palestinians, recognizing the humanity of all involved. As Christians, reclaiming this prophetic voice means not being silent in the face of injustice but standing with the oppressed and working toward a vision of reconciliation and peace. Chapter 4: The Silence of the Church. Despite the Bible's clear emphasis on justice, mercy, and the defense of the oppressed, many Christians remain silent when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This silence is particularly puzzling given the historical and theological importance of the region for Christians. The reasons behind this silence are complex, rooted in a mixture of political, theological, and social factors. This chapter explores these reasons and the implications of this silence for the global Christian community and the people living in Israel and Palestine. Fear of accusations and backlash. One of the most significant reasons many Christians hesitate to speak out is the fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. The horrific history of anti-Semitism in Europe, culminating in the Holocaust, has made any criticism of the state of Israel a sensitive issue, particularly in Western countries. Many Christians, particularly in the United States and Europe, are deeply concerned about avoiding any perception of hostility toward the Jewish people. This concern is exacerbated by the political climate in which criticism of Israel is often equated with anti-Semitism, even when it focuses on the actions of the Israeli government rather than the Jewish people as a whole. Christian Zionism, a belief held by some Christians that the establishment of the modern state of Israel is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, further complicates the matter. For these Christians, to criticize Israel is to question God's divine plan, making dissent on this issue not only politically but theologically charged. Additionally, Christians who wish to engage in critical discourse regarding Israel's policies may fear backlash from their own religious communities. Within certain denominations and evangelical circles, there is strong support for Israel, often linked to interpretations of end-times prophecy. Speaking out in favor of Palestinian rights, or even acknowledging the injustices they face, can lead to alienation from one's church or Christian peers. This creates a powerful incentive to remain silent, despite personal convictions or moral concerns. Political and theological influences. The rise of Christian Zionism has played a significant role in shaping the silence of many Christians on this issue. Rooted in a literal interpretation of biblical prophecies, Christian Zionists believe that the return of Jews to Israel and the establishment of the modern state are divine fulfillments of prophecy that will eventually lead to the second coming of Christ. This theological framework has led many to offer uncritical support for the state of Israel, viewing any opposition as a challenge to God's will. This uncritical support often overlooks the plight of Palestinians, particularly Palestinian Christians, who have been marginalized and displaced in the ongoing conflict. Christian Zionism tends to frame the issue in binary terms: Israel as the rightful, God-ordained nation and Palestinians as obstacles to the fulfillment of prophecy. Such interpretations leave little room for nuanced discussion about justice and human rights for all people in the region, further silencing those who wish to speak up for the Palestinian cause. On a political level, many Christians align themselves with conservative political movements that have historically supported Israel. The United States, for instance, has been a strong ally of Israel since its founding in 1948, and this political relationship influences how the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is framed in American churches. The alignment of conservative Christianity with pro-Israel political stances discourages open dialogue about the ethical and moral implications of the occupation of Palestinian territories. Christians who question these positions risk being seen as unpatriotic or disloyal to their political or religious communities. The complexity of the conflict. Another reason for the Church's silence is the sheer complexity of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The conflict's long history, its religious significance, and the intricacies of international law make it a difficult issue to fully grasp. Many Christians feel overwhelmed by the layers of history and politics, unsure of how to respond or take a stance. This complexity can lead to apathy or a sense of helplessness, particularly for those who do not feel equipped to engage in the conversation with any depth of knowledge. For church leaders, navigating the politics of the conflict can feel like stepping into a minefield. Any statement, no matter how carefully worded, risks alienating portions of their congregation, especially in churches where members hold diverse views on Israel and Palestine. To avoid controversy, many leaders choose to say nothing at all, opting to focus on issues perceived as more pressing or less divisive. This creates an environment where the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not discussed from the pulpit or within church-based social justice groups, perpetuating the silence. The impact of silence. The silence of the Church on the issue of Palestine has profound consequences, not only for Palestinians but also for the global Christian community. When Christians fail to speak out against injustice, they risk betraying their core values of compassion, justice, and mercy. The teachings of Jesus emphasize the importance of loving one's neighbor and standing with the oppressed, yet silence in the face of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be interpreted as complicity with the oppression of Palestinians. This silence also has a direct impact on Palestinian Christians, who often feel abandoned by their global Christian family. Palestinian Christian leaders, such as Naim Atik and Maitri Rahab, have long called for solidarity from Christians worldwide, but these calls often go unheard. The failure of the global Church to stand with Palestinian Christians contributes to their marginalization and erases their voices in the broader narrative of the conflict. The silence of the Church also contributes to a lack of awareness among the broader public. Without a prophetic voice calling attention to the injustice faced by Palestinians, the narrative remains dominated by political rhetoric that often dehumanizes Palestinians and ignores their suffering. The Church, as a moral and spiritual authority, has the power to shift this narrative, but silence allows the status quo to persist. Case studies: Christian voices of dissent. Despite the general silence within many Christian communities, there are courageous voices who have spoken out against the injustices faced by Palestinians. These individuals and organizations challenge the dominant narratives and call for a more just and equitable approach to the conflict. Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center, founded by Palestinian Anglican priest Naim Atik, is one such organization. Sabeel advocates for justice and peace in the Holy Land, using a liberation theology framework that emphasizes nonviolent resistance and solidarity with the oppressed. Atik's work calls Christians to a deeper understanding of justice in the context of the Israeli occupation, urging them to reject theologies that justify oppression. Kairos Palestine, a movement of Palestinian Christians, issued a powerful document in 2009 calling for Christians worldwide to stand in solidarity with Palestinians. The Kairos document echoes the prophetic tradition of the Old Testament, calling for an end to the occupation and for Christians to take a stand for justice and peace. The document explicitly challenges Christian Zionism and calls for a theology that affirms the dignity and rights of all people, regardless of nationality or religion. The World Council of Churches, WCC, has also been vocal in its advocacy for Palestinian rights. The WCC has consistently supported nonviolent resistance to the occupation and called for an end to the Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank. Through initiatives like the Ecumenical Accompaniment Program in Palestine and Israel, EP, the WCC sends volunteers to live alongside Palestinians and document human rights abuses, bringing international attention to the situation on the ground. These voices of dissent remind us that silence is not the only option. There are ways for Christians to engage meaningfully with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, rooted in their faith and their commitment to justice. The spiritual consequences of silence. Silence in the face of injustice is not a neutral position. For Christians, remaining silent on issues of human rights can lead to a disconnection between faith and action. Jesus called his followers to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God, Micah 6:8. When Christians fail to live out these teachings, their faith risks becoming hollow, disconnected from the realities of suffering in the world. Moreover, the Church's silence on Palestine risks alienating younger generations of Christians who are increasingly concerned with social justice. Many young Christians are attuned to global issues and expect their churches to take stands on matters of injustice. When the Church remains silent, it loses credibility with these younger believers, who may seek out other faith communities or secular movements that align more closely with their values. Breaking the silence, a call to courage. For the Church to reclaim its prophetic voice, it must be willing to break the silence. This requires courage to face criticism, to engage with difficult questions, and to stand in solidarity with those who suffer. Breaking the silence does not mean choosing sides in a political conflict, rather, it means speaking out against injustice wherever it is found and advocating for the dignity and human rights of all people. Churches can begin by educating their congregations about the complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, inviting speakers who can offer diverse perspectives and fostering dialogue that promotes understanding rather than division. Christian leaders must be willing to confront the theological and political forces that have kept them silent and instead prioritize the teachings of Jesus, which call for justice, mercy, and love. Chapter 5, Voices of Dissent. In the midst of widespread silence from many Christian communities regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there exists a courageous group of individuals and organizations who have chosen to speak out. These voices of dissent challenge the dominant narratives that often prioritize political alliances over justice, or that misinterpret biblical teachings in ways that ignore the suffering of Palestinians. They call the global Christian community to a higher standard, one that aligns with the core values of the faith: justice, mercy, and love. This chapter highlights some of the key figures, theological movements, and organizations that are working to bring justice to the forefront of the Christian response to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. These voices not only critique the status quo but offer alternative paths toward peace, reconciliation, and solidarity with the oppressed. Neomatique and liberation theology. One of the most prominent Christian voices advocating for justice in Palestine is Neomatique, a Palestinian Anglican priest and the founder of the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center in Jerusalem. Atik is widely regarded as the father of Palestinian liberation theology, a theological movement that seeks to interpret the Bible from the perspective of the oppressed, in this case, the Palestinian people living under Israeli occupation. Atik's work draws on the broader tradition of liberation theology, which emerged in Latin America in the 1960s and 1970s as a response to poverty and oppression. Liberation theology emphasizes God's preferential option for the poor and oppressed, and it encourages Christians to engage in the struggle for justice, not merely through spiritual means but through political and social action as well. In his influential book, Justice, and Only Justice, A Palestinian Theology of Liberation, Atik argues that the Bible, particularly the teachings of Jesus, calls Christians to stand with the oppressed and to work for a just peace in the land of Israel and Palestine. He challenges Christian Zionism, which he believes distorts biblical teachings to justify the occupation of Palestinian land, and he calls for a theology that promotes reconciliation, justice, and equality for all people in the region. Atik's work has inspired many within the Christian community, both in Palestine and abroad, to reconsider how they approach the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He has also faced significant criticism, particularly from those who see his theology as a threat to the narrative of Israel as a divine fulfillment of prophecy. Nonetheless, Atik's voice remains a powerful reminder that justice and peace cannot be separated from the Christian faith. Kairos Palestine, a cry for justice. In 2009, a group of Palestinian Christian leaders came together to issue the Kairos Palestine document, a landmark statement calling on Christians worldwide to take a stand against the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. Modeled after the South African Kairos document, which was written by Christian leaders in the 1980s to challenge apartheid, the Kairos Palestine document similarly calls for justice, nonviolence, and an end to oppression. The document opens with a powerful assertion of the author's faith in God's justice. We, a group of Christian Palestinians, after prayer, reflection, and an exchange of opinion, cry out from within the suffering in our country, under the Israeli occupation, with a cry of hope in the absence of all hope, a cry full of prayer and faith in a God ever present, who cares for all creation and in the midst of the history of all peoples, and who has given us the land as an inheritance for all our generations. The Kairos document calls on the international Christian community to recognize the injustices faced by Palestinians and to take concrete steps to address them, including economic sanctions and boycotts of products made in illegal Israeli settlements. It also explicitly rejects the use of violence, advocating instead for nonviolent resistance to the occupation. The document challenges Christian Zionism and calls for a more nuanced understanding of biblical prophecy, one that affirms the dignity and rights of both Israelis and Palestinians. The Kairos Palestine movement has gained significant support among global Christian communities, particularly within mainline Protestant denominations and the World Council of Churches. However, it has also faced opposition from those who view its call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS, as politically divisive. Despite these challenges, Kairos Palestine continues to be a leading voice in the Christian call for justice in the region. Maitri Rahab and the role of Palestinian Christians. Another influential figure in the movement for justice is Rev. Dr. Maitri Rahab, a Palestinian Lutheran pastor and theologian based in Bethlehem. Rahab is a leading advocate for Palestinian Christians and has worked tirelessly to amplify their voices on the global stage. He has written extensively on the experience of Palestinian Christians living under occupation and has argued that their perspective is often ignored in broader discussions about the conflict. In his book, Faith in the Face of Empire, The Bible Through Palestinian Eyes, Rahab offers a theological reflection on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, drawing on the experiences of Palestinians as a lens through which to read the Bible. He critiques the ways in which Western Christianity has often been complicit in supporting empire and colonization, and he calls for a rereading of the Bible that prioritizes the voices of the oppressed. Rahab's work has been instrumental in raising awareness about the challenges faced by Palestinian Christians, who are often caught between the Israeli occupation and the broader Christian Zionist movement, which tends to overlook their plight. He has called for a global Christian response that affirms the rights of all people in the Holy Land, regardless of their nationality or religion. Through his leadership at the Dar al-Khalima University College of Arts and Culture, Rahab has also worked to empower Palestinian youth through education, art, and cultural preservation. His commitment to nonviolence and reconciliation, coupled with his deep theological insights, has made him a respected leader in the movement for justice. Christian peacemaker teams, nonviolent resistance. Another important voice of dissent comes from the Christian peacemaker teams, CPT, an organization that sends volunteers to conflict zones to engage in nonviolent resistance and stand in solidarity with oppressed communities. Founded in 1986, CPT has been active in the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories for decades, where they accompany Palestinian communities facing violence, displacement, and human rights abuses. CPT's work is grounded in the belief that Christians are called to actively engage in peacemaking, following the example of Jesus, who taught his followers to love their enemies and to respond to violence with nonviolence. In Palestine, CPT volunteers live and work alongside Palestinian communities, documenting abuses by Israeli settlers and the military, advocating for the rights of Palestinians, and providing a protective presence to reduce violence. The organization has been a powerful witness to the potential of nonviolent resistance in the face of systemic oppression. While their work has been met with resistance and criticism from those who view it as anti-Israel, CPT's commitment to justice for all people regardless of their nationality or religion embodies the Christian call to peacemaking. The Rev. Dr. William J. Barber II, A Broader Fight for Justice. While not solely focused on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Rev. Dr. William J. Barber II has emerged as a leading voice for justice and human rights, with a message that resonates deeply with the struggle for Palestinian rights. Barber, who is the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign and a leader in the fight for civil rights and social justice in the United States, has often drawn connections between local and global struggles for justice. Barber's theology emphasizes the interconnectedness of all forms of oppression, calling Christians to a broad-based commitment to justice that includes economic, racial, and environmental issues. His work serves as a reminder that the fight for justice in Palestine is not an isolated issue but part of a global movement for human rights and dignity. Barber's advocacy, particularly his emphasis on the role of faith communities in challenging systems of power, provides a framework for understanding how Christians can engage with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a way that is consistent with their broader commitment to justice. Theological underpinnings, liberation theology and the prophetic tradition. At the heart of the Christian Voices of Dissent is a commitment to liberation theology and the prophetic tradition of the Bible. Liberation theology, which emphasizes God's preferential option for the poor and oppressed, provides a theological framework for Christians advocating for Palestinian rights. This theology challenges Christians to stand in solidarity with those who are marginalized and to actively work for their liberation. The prophetic tradition in the Bible also plays a central role in shaping the theology of dissent. The prophets' figures like Amos, Isaiah, and Jeremiah called out injustice and oppression in their societies, often at great personal risk. They spoke truth to power, demanding that rulers and religious leaders uphold justice, protect the vulnerable, and care for the poor. This prophetic tradition continues to inspire Christians today to speak out against the injustices faced by Palestinians, even when it is uncomfortable or unpopular. Chapter 6: The Impact of Fear. Fear can be a powerful force, and it often plays a significant role in silencing individuals and communities when it comes to speaking out about injustices. In the case of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, fear is a major factor contributing to the reluctance of many Christians to engage in meaningful dialogue or advocacy. This chapter explores the various forms of fear that inhibit Christian voices, the spiritual and psychological effects of this fear, and how it perpetuates silence in the face of injustice. Fear of accusations of anti-Semitism. Perhaps the most pervasive fear among Christians who wish to engage in discussions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. This fear is not without cause. The history of anti-Semitism, particularly in Europe, has left deep scars on Jewish communities. The Holocaust, in particular, has heightened sensitivity to any form of criticism directed at Jews or the State of Israel. Many Christians, especially those in Western countries, are acutely aware of this history and are therefore cautious about expressing views that might be perceived as hostile to the Jewish people. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism, which has been adopted by several countries, includes criticism of the State of Israel when it crosses into questioning the legitimacy of the state or denying Jewish self-determination. While this definition seeks to protect Jewish communities from harmful rhetoric, it has also been used to silence legitimate criticism of Israeli policies, particularly those that affect Palestinians. Many Christians, out of fear of being labeled anti-Semitic, choose to remain silent rather than risk offending Jewish individuals or communities. They may feel that their critique of Israeli government policies such as the occupation of the West Bank or the blockade of Gaza could be misconstrued as anti-Jewish sentiment. This fear stifles important conversations and prevents Christians from fulfilling their moral obligation to speak out against injustice, no matter where it occurs. Fear of alienation from the Christian community. Within many Christian communities, particularly evangelical circles, there is strong theological and political support for Israel. This support is often linked to Christian Zionism, which views the establishment of the State of Israel as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy and a key part of God's plan for the end times. As a result, any criticism of Israel's actions can be seen as undermining this theological framework, leading to alienation from one's church or faith community. For Christians who hold dissenting views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the fear of being ostracized from their religious community can be overwhelming. Church leaders, in particular, may be hesitant to address the issue from the pulpit, fearing that their congregations might react negatively or that their positions might divide the church. In some cases, Christians who have publicly spoken out in favor of Palestinian rights have faced backlash, including loss of leadership positions, exclusion from church activities, or even public denouncement. This fear of alienation creates a culture of silence within the church, where difficult topics like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are avoided altogether. The fear of disrupting the unity of the congregation or being labeled as disloyal to the broader Christian Zionist movement discourages open and honest conversations about justice, human rights, and the ethical responsibilities of Christians in the Holy Land. Fear of political repercussions. In addition to fears of religious alienation, many Christians are also concerned about the political ramifications of speaking out on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In countries like the United States, where political support for Israel is strong, expressing criticism of Israeli policies can be seen as aligning with positions that are politically unpopular or associated with fringe groups. For Christians in positions of political or social influence, the decision to speak out against the occupation or other aspects of Israeli policy can have serious consequences. They may face accusations of being unpatriotic or of aligning with anti-Israel political movements. This fear is particularly strong in the United States, where the political and financial relationship between the U.S. and Israel is robust, and where criticism of Israel is often viewed as undermining a key American ally in the Middle East. This political fear extends beyond individuals to institutions, including churches and Christian organizations. Many religious institutions rely on donations and support from congregations that hold pro-Israel views, and they fear that taking a stance in support of Palestinian rights could lead to a loss of financial backing. This economic pressure, coupled with political concerns, further perpetuates the silence surrounding the issue. Psychological and spiritual effects of fear. The fear of speaking out on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has profound psychological and spiritual consequences for many Christians. For those who feel called to advocate for justice but are held back by fear, this internal conflict can lead to feelings of guilt, frustration, and even spiritual disconnection. Many Christians experience a deep sense of cognitive dissonance, a psychological term for the discomfort that arises when one's beliefs or values are in conflict with their actions. On the one hand, they believe in the biblical mandate to pursue justice and defend the oppressed, but on the other hand, they are afraid to speak out against what they perceive as injustice in the Holy Land. This dissonance can lead to a sense of moral paralysis, where individuals feel unable to act in alignment with their faith. Spiritually, the fear of speaking out can create a sense of disconnection from the teachings of Jesus. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus calls his followers to be peacemakers, to hunger and thirst for righteousness, and to stand with the poor and oppressed. When Christians feel unable to live out these teachings because of fear, they may experience a loss of spiritual vitality, as their faith becomes more about maintaining the status quo than about pursuing the radical justice to which Jesus calls them. Furthermore, this fear can lead to isolation from the global Christian community, particularly Palestinian Christians. By remaining silent on issues of injustice, Christians in the West risk alienating themselves from their brothers and sisters in Palestine, who often feel abandoned by the global church. This sense of abandonment can deepen the divide between Palestinian Christians and their counterparts in the West, undermining the global solidarity that should define the Christian faith. Community polarization and the absence of dialogue. Fear also contributes to the polarization of Christian communities. In many churches, discussions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are avoided entirely, leaving congregations with only one perspective, an uncritical support for Israel. This lack of dialogue creates an echo chamber where dissenting voices are not heard, and where the complexity of the conflict is reduced to a simple narrative of good versus evil. Without open and honest discussions, Christians are unable to grapple with the moral and ethical implications of the conflict, and the potential for peacemaking and reconciliation is lost. Fear shuts down opportunities for learning and growth, both on an individual and communal level, and prevents Christians from exploring what it means to be faithful to the call of Jesus in the context of a complicated and painful conflict. Breaking the grip of fear, steps toward courage. Breaking free from the grip of fear requires intentional steps, both on an individual and communal level. The following are some practical ways that Christians can overcome their fear and engage more deeply with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Education and awareness. One of the most effective ways to overcome fear is through education. Churches can provide resources and opportunities for their congregations to learn about the history, politics, and human rights issues involved in the conflict. By understanding the complexities of the situation, Christians can engage in the conversation with greater confidence and nuance. Safe spaces for dialogue. Churches can create safe spaces where individuals can express their thoughts, questions, and fears without judgment. Small groups, forums, or workshops focused on justice and reconciliation can provide a supportive environment for Christians to explore their beliefs and engage with difficult topics. A theology of courage. Church leaders can preach and teach on the biblical call to courage in the face of injustice. The Bible is full of examples of individuals like the prophets, Jesus, and the early apostles who risked their lives to speak out against oppression. Christians today are called to follow in their footsteps, trusting in God's guidance and protection. Solidarity with Palestinian Christians. By building relationships with Palestinian Christians and hearing their stories, Western Christians can overcome the fear of alienation or backlash. Personal connections can humanize the conflict and provide a broader perspective that transcends political and theological divisions. Prayer and reflection. Prayer is a powerful tool for overcoming fear. Christians can pray for courage, wisdom, and discernment as they engage with the conflict. Reflecting on the teachings of Jesus and the call to be peacemakers can inspire individuals to act in faith, even when it is difficult. Conclusion of Chapter 6. Fear is a significant barrier that prevents many Christians from engaging with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Whether it is fear of being labeled anti-Semitic, fear of alienation from the church, or fear of political repercussions, this fear has profound consequences for the global Christian community and for the pursuit of justice in the Holy Land. By confronting these fears and embracing the biblical call to courage, Christians can reclaim their prophetic voice and work toward a just and lasting peace in Israel and Palestine. Chapter 7, Pathways to Advocacy. For Christians seeking to engage meaningfully with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the journey from awareness to action can seem overwhelming. The complexities of the situation, coupled with fears of backlash or alienation, often leave individuals and communities unsure of where to begin. However, the call to justice, as outlined in Scripture, demands that Christians take concrete steps to address the suffering of the oppressed, regardless of the challenges involved. This chapter offers practical pathways for Christians to advocate for justice, peace, and reconciliation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. By following these steps, individuals and communities can begin to engage with the issue in ways that are grounded in their faith and aligned with the teachings of Jesus. 1. Educate yourself and others. The first and most important step toward advocacy is education. To engage meaningfully with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Christians must take the time to understand its historical, political, and social complexities. An informed perspective will enable advocates to speak with credibility and compassion. A. Study the history of the conflict. Understanding the origins and evolution of the conflict is crucial. This includes studying the historical context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, from the Balfour Declaration, 1917, and the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, to the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe, the Six-Day War, 1967, and the Oslo Accords. Knowing the timeline of events, the key players, and the political dynamics will help Christians appreciate the depth of the conflict and avoid oversimplifying its complexities. B. Engage with diverse perspectives. When studying the conflict, it is essential to seek out diverse perspectives, particularly those of both Israelis and Palestinians. Many resources, including books, documentaries, and articles, provide in-depth insights into the conflict from different angles. Some recommended readings include Naim Atik's Justice and Only Justice, A Palestinian Theology of Liberation, which offers a theological perspective on the conflict from a Palestinian Christian viewpoint. Rashid Khalidi's The 100 Years' War on Palestine, which provides a historical analysis of the conflict from a Palestinian perspective. Ari Shavitz's My Promised Land, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel, which offers a nuanced exploration of Israeli history and identity. C. Organize educational events. Churches and Christian organizations can host forums, book clubs, or guest lectures to educate their congregations about the conflict. Inviting speakers who have lived in the region or who specialize in Middle Eastern politics and theology can provide valuable insights and foster deeper understanding. 2. Engage in advocacy efforts. Once educated, the next step is to engage in advocacy to raise awareness, support justice-oriented organizations, and push for political change. Christians can engage in advocacy on multiple levels, from grassroots efforts to international campaigns. A. Support organizations working for justice. Many organizations work to promote justice, human rights, and peace in Israel and Palestine. By supporting these groups through donations, volunteering, or sharing their work, Christians can amplify the voices of those advocating for change. Some key organizations include Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center, based in Jerusalem. Sabeel promotes a theology of liberation for Palestinians and works to raise awareness about the Israeli occupation through education, conferences, and advocacy. Christian Peacemaker Teams, CPT provides accompaniment to Palestinians living under occupation, documenting human rights abuses and advocating for nonviolent resistance to oppression. B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights organization that documents human rights violations in the occupied territories, providing crucial evidence for international advocacy efforts. B. Contact elected representatives. Advocating for political change is a vital part of supporting justice in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In countries like the United States, political decisions about foreign policy often have significant implications for the region. Christians can contact their elected representatives to express concerns about U.S. or other governments' support for Israeli policies that perpetuate the occupation or violate human rights. Writing letters, making phone calls, or even meeting with elected officials can help raise awareness about the need for policies that promote a just peace in the region. Advocacy can also include supporting legislative efforts that call for human rights protections for Palestinians, an end to settlement expansion, or a review of military aid to Israel. C. Participate in peaceful demonstrations and campaigns. Joining peaceful demonstrations or campaigns advocating for justice and peace in Israel and Palestine can be a powerful way to show solidarity with the oppressed. Movements such as the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions (BDS) campaign, which calls for economic pressure on Israel until it complies with international law, have gained significant traction in many parts of the world. While BDS remains controversial in some circles, it is seen by many as a nonviolent way to challenge Israeli policies and push for a just solution. Christians can also participate in local vigils, rallies, or educational campaigns that raise awareness about the conflict and call for peace and justice. 3. Foster interfaith and intercultural dialogue. Advocacy for justice in Israel and Palestine does not occur in isolation. Christians can play a crucial role in fostering dialogue between different faith communities, particularly between Jews, Christians, and Muslims. This dialogue can help break down barriers, foster mutual understanding, and promote reconciliation. A. Engage with Jewish and Muslim communities. One of the most important steps Christians can take is to build relationships with Jewish and Muslim communities, both in the Middle East and in their own countries. Engaging in dialogue with Jews and Muslims about the conflict can help dispel misconceptions and promote a more nuanced understanding of the different religious and political perspectives at play. Look for opportunities to join interfaith initiatives or organize joint events, such as forums, discussions, or prayer services, focused on peace and justice in the Holy Land. Such efforts can foster a sense of shared purpose and mutual respect across religious divides. B. Create platforms for diverse voices. Churches and Christian organizations can create platforms for dialogue by inviting speakers from diverse backgrounds, both Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Muslim. Hearing directly from people who have experienced the conflict can humanize the issue and offer new insights into possible pathways to peace. By facilitating these conversations, Christians can contribute to a more just and peaceful future, where all voices are heard and respected. 4. Engage in prayer and reflection. Prayer is a powerful form of advocacy that can sustain and inspire Christians in their pursuit of justice. By committing to regular prayer for peace and justice in Israel and Palestine, Christians can align their hearts and minds with the will of God. A. Prayer for justice and peace. Christians are encouraged to pray for the victims of violence, oppression, and injustice in Israel and Palestine. This includes praying for Palestinians living under occupation, for Israelis affected by violence, and for leaders who have the power to enact change. Churches can organize prayer vigils or intercessory prayer sessions dedicated to peace in the Holy Land. These gatherings can bring the community together in solidarity with those suffering and can serve as a reminder of the central role that prayer plays in the Christian response to injustice. B. Reflect on personal responsibility. Advocacy for justice also requires personal reflection. Christians are encouraged to examine their own beliefs, biases, and assumptions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Through prayer and reflection, individuals can seek guidance on how best to engage with the issue in ways that align with the teachings of Jesus and the call to love one's neighbor. Personal reflection can also involve considering one's complicity in systems of oppression, whether through political affiliations, financial support, or silence. By engaging in this self-examination, Christians can take ownership of their role in advocating for justice. 5. Take small, consistent steps. Advocacy is a long-term commitment, and the pursuit of justice in Israel and Palestine will not be achieved overnight. However, by taking small, consistent steps, Christians can make a meaningful impact over time. A. Start local. Begin by raising awareness within your own community, whether that's your church, your workplace, or your family. Share articles, books, and documentaries that offer a balanced view of the conflict and encourage conversations that promote understanding and empathy. B. Join advocacy networks. Many Christian advocacy networks focus on promoting peace and justice in Israel and Palestine. Consider joining one of these networks to stay informed, participate in advocacy campaigns, and connect with others who share your commitment to justice. Some Christian advocacy networks include Churches for Middle East Peace, CMEP, a coalition of U.S. churches that advocates for a just peace in Israel and Palestine through education, advocacy, and collaboration with Christian, Jewish, and Muslim partners. Kairos USA, a Christian organization that supports the call for justice in Palestine as articulated in the Kairos Palestine document. Conclusion of Chapter 7. Pathways to advocacy for Christians engaging with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are numerous and varied. Whether through education, political action, interfaith dialogue, prayer, or personal reflection, each step represents a commitment to justice, peace, and the teachings of Jesus. Advocacy is not a one-time action but a lifelong journey, one that requires courage, persistence, and faith. By taking these steps, Christians can make a meaningful contribution to the pursuit of a just peace in the Holy Land. Chapter 8, A Vision for Peace. Amid the ongoing violence, political gridlock, and human suffering in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, envisioning a future of peace may seem distant and improbable. Yet, hope for reconciliation and coexistence remains a central tenet of Christian faith. The vision for peace in Israel and Palestine must be grounded in justice, respect for human rights, and mutual recognition of the dignity of all people involved in the conflict. This chapter explores what a hopeful future might look like and outlines the steps necessary for Christians to contribute to the creation of lasting peace in the Holy Land. The pathway to peace will require courage, dialogue, and a commitment to addressing the injustices that have perpetuated the conflict for decades. Foundations of a just peace. At the core of a just peace is the recognition of the shared humanity of both Israelis and Palestinians. True peace cannot exist without justice, and justice demands that the rights and dignity of all people in the region are acknowledged and upheld. For Christians, peace is not simply the absence of violence but the presence of harmony, equity, and reconciliation. A. Recognition of human dignity. A just peace begins with the recognition that both Israelis and Palestinians are created in the image of God, Genesis 1:27, and therefore possess inherent worth and dignity. This recognition should shape how Christians approach the conflict, rejecting any narratives that dehumanize one side in favor of the other. Instead, peace-building efforts must be grounded in the belief that all people, regardless of their nationality or religion, deserve to live in freedom, security, and dignity. B. Addressing historical injustices. Any vision for peace must address the historical injustices that have contributed to the ongoing conflict. For Palestinians, the experience of the Nakba, the forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians during the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, remains a deep wound that has not been fully acknowledged or addressed. The ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories, the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and the blockade of Gaza have only exacerbated the sense of injustice. For Israelis, the trauma of the Holocaust and centuries of anti-Semitism have shaped their national identity and justified their need for security. Many Israelis view the existence of a secure Jewish state as essential to their survival, particularly in a region where they feel surrounded by hostile neighbors. A just peace must acknowledge both of these historical traumas and seek to address the legitimate fears and grievances of both Israelis and Palestinians. This will require a commitment to truth-telling, reparations, and efforts to heal the deep wounds of the past. A two-state solution, a path toward coexistence. One of the most widely supported frameworks for achieving peace is the two-state solution, which envisions the creation of an independent Palestinian state alongside the State of Israel. The idea of a two-state solution has been at the heart of numerous peace negotiations, including the Oslo Accords, 1993, and remains the most viable option for achieving a just and lasting peace. A. Sovereignty and self-determination. A two-state solution would allow both Israelis and Palestinians to exercise their right to self-determination, establishing borders that are recognized internationally and ensuring that both peoples can live in security. For Palestinians, this would mean the creation of a sovereign state in the West Bank and Gaza, with East Jerusalem as its capital. For Israelis, it would mean maintaining a secure Jewish state with recognized borders. The implementation of a two-state solution will require difficult compromises from both sides, particularly regarding the status of Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and the future of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. However, without a commitment to the principle of self-determination for both peoples, lasting peace will remain elusive. B. Mutual recognition and security. Peace will also require mutual recognition of both Israeli and Palestinian rights to exist as independent states. This includes guarantees of security for both peoples. Israelis must feel safe from violence and terror attacks, while Palestinians must be free from the oppressive realities of occupation, checkpoints, and military incursions. Collaborative security arrangements, potentially overseen by international bodies, can help ensure that both Israelis and Palestinians feel secure in their respective states. Trust-building measures, such as joint security initiatives or peacekeeping forces, can contribute to de-escalation and foster a sense of shared responsibility for maintaining peace. Reconciliation and restorative justice. While political solutions like the two-state framework are essential, true peace requires more than political agreements. It requires reconciliation, a healing of relationships between Israelis and Palestinians, and the implementation of restorative justice measures that address past wrongs and seek to repair the harm done. A. Dialogue and understanding. Reconciliation cannot happen without open dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians. Efforts to foster dialogue between these communities must be prioritized, as they offer opportunities for both sides to hear each other's stories, acknowledge each other's pain, and build mutual understanding. Peace and dialogue initiatives such as joint educational programs, cultural exchanges, and interfaith dialogues can help break down the barriers of fear and hatred that have sustained the conflict for so long. These initiatives should emphasize the shared humanity of both peoples and work to dispel the myths and stereotypes that fuel hostility. B. Truth-telling and accountability. As part of the reconciliation process, there must be space for truth-telling and accountability. This could take the form of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, modeled after the South African experience, where victims and perpetrators of violence and oppression can come forward to share their stories, seek justice, and begin the process of healing. For peace to be meaningful, there must also be accountability for human rights abuses committed by both sides. This includes holding those responsible for violence, displacement, and other violations of international law to account. Without justice, reconciliation will remain superficial, and the cycle of violence is likely to continue. See restorative justice. Restorative justice goes beyond punitive measures and focuses on repairing the harm done to victims and communities. This could involve reparations for displaced Palestinians, efforts to rebuild destroyed homes and communities, and initiatives to support the economic and social development of both Israel and Palestine. Restorative justice seeks not only to address the harm of the past but also to build a future where both Israelis and Palestinians can thrive. It is an essential component of any peace process that seeks to be just and lasting. The role of faith communities. Faith communities have a unique role to play in the peace process, particularly in fostering dialogue, advocating for justice, and promoting reconciliation. Christians, Jews, and Muslims all have deep historical and spiritual ties to the land of Israel and Palestine, and these religious communities can serve as bridges of understanding and hope in a deeply divided region. A. Churches as agents of peace. Churches can act as agents of peace by providing spaces for dialogue, education, and advocacy. Christian leaders can use their platforms to promote a message of reconciliation, justice, and nonviolence, encouraging their congregations to engage in efforts to build peace in Israel and Palestine. Churches can also collaborate with Jewish and Muslim communities to promote interfaith understanding and to work together on initiatives that foster peace and justice in the region. B. Interfaith cooperation. Interfaith cooperation is critical for achieving lasting peace in the Holy Land. Jews, Christians, and Muslims must come together to address the political, social, and religious challenges that have divided them. By working together, these communities can challenge the forces of extremism, promote mutual respect, and create a shared vision for peace that reflects the values of all three faiths. Initiatives such as joint interfaith dialogues, peace-building workshops, and collaborative humanitarian efforts can serve as powerful symbols of unity and shared purpose in a land often divided by religion and politics. A hopeful future, living together in peace. Ultimately, the vision for peace in Israel and Palestine is one where both peoples can live side by side in harmony, with mutual respect for each other's rights, identities, and histories. This vision requires a commitment to justice, an openness to reconciliation, and a shared desire for peace that transcends the divisions of the past. A shared society. A hopeful future for Israel and Palestine includes the possibility of a shared society, where both Israelis and Palestinians can live together in peace, even within a two-state framework. This would involve promoting initiatives that encourage coexistence, such as integrated schools, joint business ventures, and shared public spaces. Building a shared society will require dismantling the structures of separation that have divided the two peoples for so long, including the physical and psychological barriers that have been erected between them. It will also require efforts to address economic inequalities and to promote equal access to resources, education, and employment opportunities. B. Peace as a collective goal. Peace in Israel and Palestine will not come about through the efforts of one side alone. It must be a collective goal, pursued by both Israelis and Palestinians, with the support of the international community. Peace requires courage to confront injustice, courage to forgive, and courage to believe that a better future is possible. As Christians, the call to be peacemakers, Matthew 5:9, is central to our faith. We are called to be agents of reconciliation in a world torn by conflict, and to work toward a future where justice and peace prevail. Conclusion: the Christian call to peacemaking. The vision for peace in Israel and Palestine is not just a political or humanitarian goal, it is a reflection of the Christian commitment to justice, mercy, and reconciliation. As followers of Christ, we are called to stand with the oppressed, to speak truth to power, and to work tirelessly for a world where peace and justice reign. This journey will not be easy, and the obstacles are many. But with faith, courage, and a commitment to the teachings of Jesus, Christians can play a vital role in building a just and lasting peace in Israel and Palestine, one that honors the dignity of all people and reflects the love of God for all creation. Conclusion: answering the call for justice. As we conclude this exploration of the complex dynamics surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it is crucial to reflect on the themes presented and the call to action that emerges from them. Throughout this book, we have examined the reasons many Christians hesitate to speak out against injustices, the impact of fear, pathways to advocacy, and the vision for a just and peaceful future. Each chapter has underscored the moral and spiritual imperative for Christians to engage with this issue meaningfully. A call to conscience. The teachings of Jesus challenge us to love our neighbors, seek justice, and advocate for the oppressed. In light of this call, it is essential for Christians to examine their conscience and consider how they can respond to the suffering faced by Palestinians. This involves not only recognizing the historical injustices but also actively engaging in advocacy efforts that promote peace, justice, and reconciliation. Awareness is key. Understanding the complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is fundamental. As Christians educate themselves, they can begin to dismantle the fears that have inhibited their voices. Knowledge empowers individuals to speak with confidence and compassion. The power of advocacy. Advocacy is not just a moral obligation, it is a means of embodying the love of Christ in a world that often turns a blind eye to injustice. By taking concrete steps, whether through education, grassroots movements, or dialogue, Christians can significantly impact the lives of those affected by the conflict. Building bridges of peace. The path to peace is not an easy one, but it is a necessary journey. It requires individuals and communities to actively work toward understanding, dialogue, and collaboration. Embrace interfaith initiatives. Building relationships with those of different faiths fosters mutual respect and understanding. Interfaith dialogue and cooperation can pave the way for a shared commitment to justice and peace. Create a culture of advocacy. Churches can serve as catalysts for change by promoting a culture of advocacy within their congregations. By encouraging open discussions, supporting educational initiatives, and engaging in advocacy efforts, faith communities can amplify the message of justice. Hope for the future. Despite the challenges, there is hope for a better future, a future where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace and mutual respect. This hope is grounded in the belief that transformation is possible, driven by the dedication of individuals and communities committed to justice. Stories of resilience. Throughout history, there have been countless stories of individuals and organizations working tirelessly for peace. These narratives remind us that change is achievable and that our efforts, however small, can contribute to a larger movement for justice. Faith as a driving force. For many, faith serves as a guiding light in the pursuit of justice. The call to love, serve, and advocate for the marginalized resonates deeply within the Christian tradition. By aligning their actions with their faith, Christians can be powerful agents of change. The path forward. As we move forward, let us embrace the call to action. Each reader is encouraged to reflect on how they can contribute to the pursuit of justice in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Whether through education, advocacy, or interfaith dialogue, every effort counts. Get involved. Identify organizations that align with your values and consider supporting their efforts. Attend events, participate in discussions, and amplify the voices of those advocating for justice. Engage in prayer. Prayer is a powerful tool for change. Commit to praying for peace, justice, and reconciliation in the region. Let your prayers inspire action and fuel your dedication to the cause. Share the message. Encourage others to engage with the issue by sharing your insights and experiences. Conversations about justice can inspire others to join the movement and advocate for a more just world. Final thoughts. The journey toward justice and peace is ongoing, and each of us has a role to play. As Christians, we are called to stand in solidarity with the oppressed, to speak truth to power, and to embody the love of Christ in our actions. Together, we can work toward a future where justice prevails, where the voices of the marginalized are heard, and where peace flourishes. Let us answer the call for justice, knowing that through our collective efforts, we can help create a world that reflects the values of love, compassion, and dignity for all.